All right, what's going on, everyone? Joined today by Ahmed Hassan to talk about private military companies all around the world. Ahmed is the CEO of Grey Dynamics, a British private intelligence firm, and he and I talk about the rise of the modern PMC, the openings that they've been able to exploit, especially in Africa, and the idea of crowdsourcing PMCs right from your living room, which don't do that. It's probably illegal. Hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, we're going. Ahmed, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And
Really
so,
excited.
just we've got Ahmed Hassan, the CEO of Grey Dynamics, which is a private intelligence firm based out of London. Do you mind just taking a couple minutes, kind of giving your background, who you are, and what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ahmed Hassan. Um, a bit of an interesting journey, but I started my career actually in finance. A lot of people don't know that, but I got out of school when the financial crisis of 2008 hit,
Good
right?
timing.
So, yeah, good timing. It was not good times, but I really slugged my way through it, and then um, I just decided to travel and ended up in Africa. I traveled to around 28 countries, um, some with friends, some with family, and ended up in Kenya. From Kenya into Somalia, where I was born. But I've only lived there since I've only lived there for 3 years of my life, and then I kind of like rolled into intelligence work, started with policy work, and worked on Al Shabaab for a long time in Somalia and Kenya, and around. I have to be careful what I say because some of that work I still do.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that we do that still with Great Dynamics. But main issues that I've looked at was terrorism and transnational organized crime. Started out in the Horn and did some work in the Sahel, and kind of like switched over from human intelligence to analysis and set up Great Dynamics in 2017, and yeah, I've been working on that since then. So I have to say, like in the first 3 years, it was kind of like a side hustle, and then just you get one assignment, and then the ball starts rolling.
That's cool, man. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of the transnational organizations and criminal organizations, or however we're going to call them, we were thinking today of diving into this kind of recent focus you've got on the Grey Dynamic site, these articles about private military companies or PMCs. I was going to ask you about, UK based PMCs. Wagner's in the news right now out of Russia, and then
Hmm.
at least for an American audience, everybody thinks of Blackwater and Triple Canopy. But is there a comparison in the UK?
I think the best one you could compare it to is Aegis.
Okay.
Um, they were, I think they started out as Sandline. That's very controversial with Simon Mann. I think they were involved in some coup attempts. They landed in prison. I think your listeners will know when I mention Simon Mann who that is. Um, I think that, but they've come a long way. Very professional. They held contracts with the U.S. government during the Iraq War.
Ah,
So I think they were one of the biggest contractors for the US government, and that's a British company. So they didn't really work with the British government, just how the British government works. But BP and a lot of big companies worked with them. So I think that's the best one I could name. There are a couple of smaller ones that are specialized. Pilgrims Group, I think, is another one. But Aegis Week, we are covering that one during our PMC week. So that article is coming.
well, how do you guys dial into what you're going to cover? Because it seems like that topic, PMC, it's very broad. I mean, Wagner is a full out military force with T-90s,
Mm-hmm.
helicopters, maybe even fixed wing aircraft flying around
Yeah.
Ukraine. all the way over to some more of these are more like security companies almost. How do you guys
Yeah,
decide what to dial in on?
that's a great question. And that has been a big debate within the team, which ones we're going to cover and which ones we are not. I think the way we start out in any thematic focus that we do, because the one before that we did on intelligence tradecraft, and the one before that on Sahel security, and I think in December we did Arctic security. So I think the way we focus on organizations, or I focus on them, is because of what we do, focus on topics around irregular warfare and like gray zone. I know it's been used to death now, but hence the name of the company. I think for us, if an organization cannot or does not do that type of work where it functions between war and peace, I think Wagner has passed that. They are a full-fledged. They are actively, involved in a war. Well, I don't know if they still will be after
Up
this
in the air.
weekend's, but that's how we kind of like picked up. And so there are a couple of obscure ones that we're going to cover more, but I think that was Wagner was kind of a template, as it were. Well, if I'm being really honest, the template is executive outcomes. That's we published that today, actually. Executive outcomes is the granddaddy of PMCs as we know them today,
Okay.
like Wagner. If you talk to senior Wagner guys, they will talk about their love and admiration for executive outcomes.
Can you give a little background there on what executive outcomes is?
Executive Outcomes is a PMC that was started by a gentleman called Eben Barlow, South African. He's a former military officer involved, during the tail end of the apartheid fight against the ANC, and understands African politics, terrain, and got a lot of guys that were former South African special operations, recce guys, and started a company that he called Executive Outcomes. And they were involved in a couple of conflicts, like Sierra Leone, where they fought the RUF. And they had their own helicopter gunships, jets, yeah, and different types of armor. And so these guys, are the godfathers. I would say Eben Barlow is pretty much the godfather of, and he's still around. So
Just laughing,
yeah,
like the name Executive Outcomes, that's like a CEO coaching company in corporate America, right? Or
yeah,
in the corporate domain. But I would not have,
it's
yeah.
it's when in the US, and I think also in the UK, when they come up with these names that are super generic, but it's the most badass units that go behind those names, like intelligence support activity, right?
Oh,
So
sure. Yeah.
right, so
That sounds
these
boring.
type of, yeah, very boring names, but they were very capable. They got into some issues, but they've started operations again, I think like 2 years ago. They came back, but they've been around like since the 90s. They changed the name to Steps International. They were involved in the fight against Boko Haram,
Okay.
and but presidential elections, this is maybe 8 years ago, and the new incoming, I think, was Goodluck Jonathan, the new president at the time, and he didn't want to work with them. So, and they were very effective against Boko Haram.
Now, one of the dynamics I think is interesting with these PMCs, I don't know if it applies necessarily to all, but that a lot of times they're welcomed where they're operating because
Yeah,
they're right. Like we view it as like, oh my God, this PMC is down there wreaking havoc. But yes, but the locals or at least local forces and government sometimes like they want them there, correct?
yeah, yeah, that is true. I think you have to also see it through the lens of governments want monopoly on power, on violence, monopoly on violence, right? So a private actor coming in is a direct threat on that. And offering security support, going into Wagner a little bit, offering security support to an African country or an Asian country is part of diplomacy, right? And part of, we want to get something from you. What can we offer? And I think a lot of African countries are treated like they're infantilized, right? They're treated like they have no agency. But Wagner could only happen because of the shortcomings of France and the US and other Western countries, where France, for example, in Central African Republic or Mali, Burkina Faso, has a colonial history. Russia does not, neither does Wagner. So that's, if you look at the people that have championed Wagner, it's a lot of intellectuals that grew up during the Cold War. And a lot of these countries got their independence with the help of the Soviet Union, right? So South Africa, that's now being, I think the US ambassador to South Africa was pissed that that they allegedly supported Russia.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I don't want to go too far off track here, but South Africa has endemic issues, power issues, and they won't. If they talk to America or another Western country, the World Bank, they will say, we're not giving you a cent if you're going to invest that in coal plants, right? Or they wanted to turn the coal plants into gas, right? And no, that's also a fossil fuel. So South Africa was almost choked into going green. And now they are doing load shedding and they don't have enough power for their country. So if you're in that situation and China comes along or Russia comes along, so yeah, we'll give you exactly what you want.
Sure.
Right? And we want either payment, resources, support in the UN, whatever it may be. That's what we'll give you. And that's what happens, right? Mali asked the West, we want helicopter gunships or we want more autonomy in operations. No, we will do the air support for you, right? Wagner comes in, here you go. Here's the helicopter gunships, here's the jets that you wanted. I think there is a responsibility from the West to not go overboard and not give heavy weapons to an unstable government or in the case of Mali, a junta government, which they came through power through a coup, right? There, you could say that's illegitimate. So it's very difficult because then other countries will do the same. But the Chinese and the Russians, they don't care about humanitarian issues or how politics is done or free and democratic elections. So it's not on their minds. They want what's best for their country, and a lot of African nations want what's best for their country. Sure. And that doesn't really go hand in hand with the policies, and that's not a wrong thing. I think the US should have a certain level of governance and ideals that are important to align with countries. And if they are not there, then sadly, these are the potential consequences that could happen.
So in some of those countries, like the opening is there, it's clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an opportunity. Yeah. Why PMCs though, instead of overt state actors? Why are we not seeing, Russia or China or the United States or anyone else, like just put State Department people there and diplomats and military and whatever else it is?
Great question. I think it's a combination of a couple of things. First of all, I don't think any American is waiting to see American forces in Mali losing their lives, right?
Not popular, yeah.
And any American casualty is too many for the American public.
Right.
That's very similar to the Chinese. right? And maybe not on the same level, but the I think it's a lot of optics, and Wagner is a deniable asset, right? So even though everybody knows that they were supported and controlled by the MOD, the Russian MOD, um, they still were. They could still say, well, they're illegal here, so you know, it's a private entity. We have nothing to do with it. So I think that made it easier for a business to do it than for a country, because if you do it as a country, there's the UN that you have to, the Security Council, sanctions, these type of things that you have to, adhere to. With China, it has its own issues with Taiwan, right? And it doesn't want to be seen as an example. Russia, right? Russia took Crimea. The Chinese cannot condone that, right?
Right.
Because they are all about Taiwan is China, right? So sovereign borders should be respected. The US should stay away from China. So you cannot not say openly that the Ukrainians should not have Crimea, right? So there are optics that are in place. So it is easier to work through economic means and private means to to get through, and PMCs are an example, a good example of that.
I'm interested in your take as to whether or not PMC is a route that Western countries, NATO countries, United States, UK should go down. I'll rather than throwing that all on you, I will say my personal opinion is
Go on.
I think we could do more there.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to have PMCs like Wagner kicking down doors and going on direct action
Mm-hmm.
raids, but we have troops all around the world in training environments, and I think there's potential there, and maybe even cost savings for the Department of Defense to put that out to the high bidder. It's probably going to be a bunch of military veterans, anyways. That could great give additional jobs to veterans. I'm not talking about combat operations in Mali, but what about training HIMARS operators in Qatar? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think we could probably do more there. But anyways, do you think that more Western countries may go the route of PMCs?
I don't know if they will go the route, but if you ask me what my opinion is, I think there is space for it. Do not be mistaken. There are quote unquote PMCs, Western ones, American ones
Sure. Yeah.
on the continent, right? In Somalia, in Somalia and in Mali, there's an organization called Bancroft International, and they've been there
That sounds
for,
like it's straight out of a
no,
Marvel movie.
yeah,
Bancroft.
yeah, they've been training. So what you're talking about, so they've been training African Union troops
Okay.
and Somali troops. So those roles are there. I think outside of the US, maybe the appetite and culture is not there. And I think a lot of people are looking very envious at Wagner and saying like, you know, that could be an easy route. But then you see what they did this weekend, and is that really what you want? That a private company that you help build and use and abuse to then turn around and threaten you, right? And I think that's also a lesson that came out of this weekend. So if there were any ideas of doing it, um, I don't think they exist today. I think America and the UK probably the two countries that would be more open to it. But I think you're right in the sense that more should be done, right? And you should not cede Africa as a continent and African countries to China because, well, we cannot compete. That's not an attitude that America should have,
Leave it be. Not a good thing.
right? Yeah.
So you've got this whole series coming out on PMCs. It's not just so
Mm-hmm.
so easy to just go down the rabbit hole with Wagner right now.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ones you guys are focused on?
So we covered Wagner on Monday, and we covered a PMC called a Veteran and Convoy. And I think most of your listeners, and I don't want to insult their intelligence on their knowledge, but most people in the West will not have heard of these guys. So these are PMCs, and I have to put quotation marks around it because they are PMCs, but they're not, in the sense that they're controlled and set up by the government, by the Russian government.
Okay.
So the Russian government likes the concept of Wagner, doesn't like what Wagner has become or the one who runs it, right? So they created different PMCs, different characters, different. Basically, what's happening now in Russia is that all these oligarchs and government officials, Siloviki, the security officials around Putin, are realizing, what if Russia collapses? How are we going to stay safe?
Better
Right?
get a little army. Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So that's what you're seeing now. You're seeing these government controlled but bankrolled by oligarchs, right? So Convoy is an example of that in Ukraine. They're very active. If you look at their gear, their setup, very modern, almost Western in the kit that they carry. Same for Veteran, and and then I think there is another one called Patriot. That's probably the most secretive one of all. We
Is that the
haven't
one
covered
that's
them.
like hardcore Putin?
The hardcore Putin that's the guys from Veteran. So
Okay.
they even have Putin as on their patches,
That's what I mean.
right? Yeah, that's Veteran. But Patriot allegedly is controlled by Shoigu and and perhaps an oligarch that's helping him fund it. But allegedly, Patriot has been involved in Africa, Middle East, places like Yemen, in Latin America, places where we thought, hey, that's Wagner, was in some cases Patriot. And
Which
Patriot recruits.
it kind of
Sorry,
matters.
go
But
ahead.
I was going to say it kind of matters, but it also kind of
It
doesn't.
does.
Because at the end of the day, whether they wear the Wagner patch or a different patch, it's still part of the Russian state.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. I think Wagner got maybe the most latitude. Not maybe, they got the most latitude of all of them because they were one of the original ones. And but Patriot allegedly has been very active. They're sanctioned by the US government. As you've seen that Wagner, certain sanctions were stopped this weekend. And so not to seem like, the US government is supporting or the West is supporting Wagner against or maybe, to give, I should say that differently, to give Wagner most leeway as it can have, right, to challenge Putin. And I think the diplomatic cables that went to Ukraine were like, hey, don't strike Russia while this is going on.
I saw some
And
reporting on that. Yeah.
right, so, and that makes sense. But yeah, Wagner is the interesting one, but there is so many, man. There's so many
Do you
Russian
remember?
PMCs that are.
Do you remember? It was early in the war. There was a Western, I think, American-led PMC. I want to say Mozart. I don't.
Yeah, Mozart Group.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any idea? I feel like they were like gaining in popularity and then just they were
I
gone.
have to be very careful with what I say here,
Okay.
because there's two main narratives around Mozart Group. So they were started out, I think, with goodwill, trained Ukrainians, Mozart, as a counter to Wagner. Wagner is a famous, composer. So was Mozart, bit tongue in cheek. But it was set up by two gentlemen. I think Andy Milburn and Andy Bain. We wanted to do an article on it, but there's so much he said, she said going on. They broke. And I think Annie Milburn left Ukraine. So the narratives were a bit difficult to make true. What's true? But I think they started out with a good idea and good intentions, and probably money got in the way.
Was it a
But as
training
far as I
organization?
know, yeah,
That's
from
how.
what I understand, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
It
that's what they were
wasn't.
doing.
It wasn't direct action. They weren't, or was
Well,
that
if it
eventually where they're
was,
going to?
well, if it was, they're not saying it,
Gotcha.
you know. But like from the training, they're very open about that. I think Andy Milburn has done podcasts where he talks about the journey. So that is around.
I imagine they were like many of the other groups in Ukraine. There's so many donations flowing to Ukraine from around the world,
Yeah.
really. And I think it's unique to Ukraine right now, but really just kind of it opens my eyes to, an American citizen or a British citizen could fund these essentially PMCs anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
If an
Yeah.
opposition group pops up inside of Afghanistan and we're like, let's get behind that, do a couple, promotional videos. Next thing you know, we're funding a warlord. Do you see that as a viable way for PMCs, or is that like pennies compared to what they actually need?
No, I see that as a very valid. That's a valid point, and it's happened before in non-Western countries where the diaspora of a country sends remittances, and that remittances be used by warlords to, protect their own.
Really?
Right? Yeah. I mean, in Somalia, it's a good example. It happened, and where maybe one group of people is being subjugated, and then their family abroad or their clan members abroad, they gather money, to support that. So that has happened. I think there's a really great book called Out of the Mountains. It was written by David Kilcullen, and probably one of the best scholars, and I think he's a former military officer, Australian, on counterinsurgency, and he speaks about the modern guerrilla, and he talks about how a lot of these militias, terrorist groups, organized crime groups in the global south are supported financially, intelligence wise, by people in other countries, right? And I think a lot of organizations in Ukraine are getting funding from Ukrainians, that live in Canada or in the US, and which makes a lot of sense, of course,
Yeah.
right? And I think that there are 8 organizations active in Ukraine today that have not a cent of government funding, completely funded by donations. So that shows to you how much money through donations is flowing towards Ukraine.
To me, like I'm not worried about, Islamic State Mexico getting funding to
Mm-hmm.
start a branch there or something because every, the internet's going to shut it down. Google's going to take that offline
Yeah.
and YouTube's going to shut. But like if there's a group that has, what if it's kind of in light with Western or United States interests, a group pushing back against the Taliban or any organization in various countries that we do not support, a Russian group, right? What if there's a Russian mercenary
Mm-hmm.
group inside of Russia trying to do something against Putin and Americans get on board funding that? It feels like a can of worms. Like we're involved, but we're not involved.
Yeah, a great point. I think it may already be happening.
No need to worry about it. It's already out there.
Yeah. No, I think genuinely, I think it's already happening. I don't like to talk about politics, which is why Great Dynamics never does. It's a distraction of what the reality on the ground is. And the reality on the ground doesn't care about politics. It cares about money and power, right? And politics is maybe a language to get those things, right? Or it's in service of power and money. I think the way to look at this issue is that a lot of like American, Western, maybe Asian even, on individuals may like what a group like Wagner is talking about, right? Um, Fiercely nationalistic. They go into a lot of like tropes of like the great replacement theory, and you know, they and there's a lot of like neo-Nazi sentiments, right, in Wagner. It's funny because they're going to denazify Ukraine, but it's filled, with those guys. So you will see that some of those extreme political views, they resonate across the world, right? And even if some of the political ideals or ideologies that they have do not align, they will pick and choose what they like about a group, right? So that can be a guy in Nigeria who is a counterterrorism guy running around with a um, anti or ISIS killer. That's the Wagner patches, right? That they wear on their arms.
Mhm.
Or a guy in the US saying, hey, these guys are, protecting their homeland, right? Because there is narrative, there are narratives, and at the end of the day, I think that's maybe the biggest conflict that's going on, this narrative conflict, right? This information warfare that we're seeing, where the Russians and the Chinese have understood, hey, we know what buttons to push, right? And so Wagner will come out, and or Putin himself will come out and say, the West is degenerate, and they are celebrating, they have silly rainbow flags and all these type of things that they use, right? And there are people that will say, yeah, I feel that way, right? But forget that these guys are like murderous, you know, individuals. So I think that might already happen. There might be already people, and I say might because I'm pretty sure there are, but I don't have proof myself.
Sure.
But I have read from people that they receive gifts and donations that either directly or indirectly reach them, right? So I think, yeah, we might already be there.
I understand it, right? Like if you're interested in whatever the cause might be, and you've got this group out there fighting every day, putting up social media posts about their progress or the casualties they've sustained,
Mm-hmm.
like it's action. If you can
Mm-hmm.
support that group, buy them a drone, buy them some tourniquets, whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
or a group that says this is what we stand for, and we give speeches on this, and we try to influence policy. Like I can understand how one is more interesting
Mm-hmm.
to give to than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. They're doing something, right?
Mhm.
I wish I could just like go out there and do something,
But I can't, so I
right?
give them some money. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's a very dangerous game. If anybody's listening right now and thinking like, oh, that's a good idea,
No,
don't do
no.
it, because they are sanctioned groups. You will go to prison for it. It's pretty much like funding terrorists. So if you get caught doing that, you're gonna go to prison. So don't do that. And I think even it's also like it's romantic for a lot of people, right? It's romantic for the young guy living in South London, feeling I don't belong. I don't I don't have I don't feel like I'm valued. You know what? I'm gonna go to Syria, right? And I'm gonna join whatever group, right? I think there is a very similar sentiment that groups like Wagner present to young men.
Mhm.
All right. And so they might not send money, or they get they get they get this, adventure and soldier of fortune. If you ask guys from Wagner, older guys, they will tell you they love soldier of fortune. All right. They
Sure.
love America, right? They love that ideal. all of them talk about, America is this and America is that, and sometimes it's used against American policies of, we are becoming weaker and this and that, but all of them are wearing American special operations gear
Sure.
and style and tattoos, and so that I think that part of culture, right, that they are trying to fight, you're already losing because you're wearing literally the uniform of your so-called enemy, right? And I think that's very I think that's a very silly thing to do from Wagner's side. Like uh, if you need to, you don't have to wear, you don't have to mimic Western special operations vet bro looks, but that's what they do. And in the same breath they say, the West is degenerate or whatever, right? And then all of their like elite have like houses in London, and so so it's interesting.
All part of that information war, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so in that context, the information war, something that's been interesting in this conflict, at least to me, is how many people are able to kind of jump in and analyze content and put things out. I've had people refer to me as an analyst. I don't feel like I'm that at all. Commentator would be what I would say. I try to leverage things.
Curator.
Yeah, right. Like what you do. Like I look at your work and the work of people like Militant Wire and others who are the analysts to try to understand what's going on. But you guys just started a program, right? Where you're actually, instead of just looking at Google Maps and reading Telegram channels, kind of helping teach the actual art of becoming an analyst. Would you be able to talk about that at all?
Yeah. I mean, we're still working on it, but we announced last week it's an online intelligence school, and the first few courses will be around fundamentals of intelligence and understanding that. And I think what we're trying to do is to get people at least the basics of what we do and what intelligence as an analyst is about. It doesn't really matter. We are agnostic on what the topic is, more about the tradecraft itself. And then phase two will be smaller classes, and it will be classes wherein you have an analyst teaching you or another intelligence professional, and this might be somebody from the US or the UK or whatever. And there are assignments, and then phase three is what we already kind of do, which is we do like simulations for more experienced analysts, where we come, we meet in a location, and then we run simulations, or we do like intelligence, like war gaming type of stuff. But for now, hopefully in the coming months, we will be ready. We partner up with a University of Salford in the UK. They also have an intelligence course, but more study of intelligence. And what we are trying to teach people is how to do intelligence and how to understand it in your day-to-day life. So you don't even have to want to become an analyst or intelligence professional. It's more about how do you process information, critical thinking, these very important skills of how do you discern what information is the right one, and how do you determine what the level of trustworthiness of the source is, right? So these type of things that we're trying to teach people. And we're starting out with 6 courses, all fundamental intelligence courses. The first one is more of an all-rounder. All the other ones are built around direction, collection, processing, analysis of intelligence, and dissemination. So how to write properly, how to brief, these type of things. And if anybody's interested, I would say go to our website, and if you click on Intelligence School, you can sign up for a newsletter, a waiting list. And I think we will go online with the school next week, so people can find out more about the courses, and they can learn. And the first cohort will start probably, I think, in August, and depending on how because I don't think anybody is doing the accreditation the way we are doing it, because it's a difficult thing to do. But as soon that is done, we will have 100 people that can do the first cohort, even though
Okay.
it's self-paced completely. But we want to be able to give you as much attention as we can. So we cannot take on more than 100 people. So each cohort, which will be around 2-3 months, will be 100 people. And if you finish that one, you can do phase 2. And the idea is for the future, near future, to have other experts to come in and have their courses on our school, in our school, that we vet, that we also accredit. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what it is. Sorry if I
That's
went on a little bit long
no,
there.
that's awesome. Let me know when that comes out, because I think a lot of people would
Will
be
do.
very, very interested in signing up. So we will put the description to the intelligence school and your website in the description below. But anywhere else that people can reach out and find your work?
I think if you want intelligence and you want to engage with what we write and more of our long form stuff, I'd say go to our website and subscribe. You know, there's free subscriptions and there's paid ones. If you just want to see what we are doing, what we're thinking, what we're up to, Instagram or Twitter. I think Instagram is probably the easiest to get hold of me. If you just send a message there, and please don't do it all at once. I know you have a lot of viewers. But yeah, follow us on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, anywhere where you get your information. We are on YouTube. So we have a podcast that we put on YouTube. It's not with video, but you're more handsome than me, so I haven't decided to doing that yet, but I will say it's a great podcast. You know, we have a lot of former and current intelligence professionals and security professionals on, and we don't have that many followers on YouTube. So if you can give us a follow and a like, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. We'll put all of those links in the description below. But Ahmed, thank you so much for taking the time, man. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, hope to stay in touch.
Same. And yeah, for sure. You know, I hope to be back soon and talk about whatever else is going on in the world.
It's always something.
All right, man.
All right, we'll see you.
Cheers.